meeting of the Pension Board today on the 14th of September. Thanks to everyone for joining virtually. We'll run this meeting as we normally do. We haven't met officially since the meeting in February. However, there was a meeting in June, and I'll just briefly refer to that in a minute. First of all, we start with the declaration of interest. Has anyone any declaration of interest? Anyone has raised their hands? No? Okay. Before we go on, could I just pay tribute briefly to Paul Wiggins? I think, as we all know, Paul sadly died in June after a long illness, and he'd been a member of the board since it was formed. And Paul was exemplary, I think, both in his approach to the membership of the board and his approach to us as individuals. And I think it was a privilege that we served with him on the board. And I certainly will remember him with a lot of gratitude and affection. I don't think in a virtual meeting you can really have a 2-minute silence effectively. So when we actually meet in Liverpool again, whenever that may be, I propose we do that. But if we could just enter in a minute what I said about Paul, because he will be sadly missed. And he was, as an individual, I think, a tremendous person. I don't think anyone else wants to make any brief comments.
I will, John, if I could. I just to echo those comments. Paul was a really good member of that board, and we should pay tribute to him as appropriate when we can get together again. I think that's a really good idea. But it is sad news, and but he was a great servant to the pension board, and that should be recognised.
Donna?
Yeah, I definitely agree. He was really committed officer, and we're going to miss his knowledge and skills. So, really sad loss.
Thank you.
Just add to that, John. Yeah, I knew Paul for a number of years in various roles, and he was a man of integrity and principle. So he will be sadly missed. So I very much agree. We do that when we can meet physically. It'd be very appropriate. Thank you.
Okay. If we could move on to the minutes of the 5th of February. I was just going to scroll down, and if I can, on this other PC I have. That's going to work. If anyone's got any comments, can they just sort of stop me? So effectively page 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Is everyone content with those minutes?
Yeah.
Can I therefore be?
Yeah, fine, thank you.
That's great, thank you. Sign when we're next in Liverpool. Also, of course, we did have a meeting, in fact, this coming minute on the 8th of June. Unfortunately, at that stage, it wasn't possible to have a formal board meeting, but we did have a meeting on the 8th of June where 8 of the 9 board members were present, and that was held and conducted as a normal board meeting with a normal agenda. And if we could possibly record something in the minutes to the effect that took place, because I intend to refer to that in the annual report for this year when I write it, because as far as I'm concerned, we will have met 4 times this year. So if we could just record that, if everyone's content.
Yes,
Okay.
agreed.
LGPS update. Yvonne? She's here.
Yeah, I'm here. You hear
All
me?
yours, Yvonne.
Okay.
Yeah.
Hi, everybody. Right, this briefing covers the government's response to the consultation on restricting exit payments in the public sector. And the key points are the government has decided not to proceed with a staged approach to introduce the cap as they originally intended. It's been confirmed that early access employer strain costs will be included. And whilst there's no current plans to operate the 95k cap, there is means through the secondary legislation to do this. The regulations will affect LGPS members who qualify for an unreduced pension on redundancy or efficiency grounds. and where the cap is breached, a member would have to take a reduced pension. Therefore, the government is looking at options to introduce a choice to allow members to opt for a deferred pension instead. A standard strain cost will be introduced so that the cap can be applied equally to members across the LGPS. It's expected that the cap will be enforced at the... Sorry, I didn't realise someone was coming in then. A standard strain cost will be introduced so that the cap can be applied equally to members across the LGPS. And it's expected that the cap will be enforced at the end of the calendar year. As a consequence, employment contracts, compensation regs and pension schemes will need to be changed. McCLOUD also issued a consultation last week on reforms to exit payments for local government, which radically changes severance packages. The proposals go much further than originally expected, than those that don't exceed the 95k cap. There are a number of choices how members can access the redundancy packages, but the proposals will significantly reduce payments and introduce greater complexity. It will affect governance arrangements with the need to segregate employers, as some employers aren't affected, and there's also significant impact on retirement processes, information flows and communications with both members and employers. The second section covers the ministerial section, statements on survivor benefits, and as a result of a discrimination case brought against the teachers' pension scheme relating to historical widowers' pensions. For widowers whose spouse left between April 88 and 98, this will lead to an increase in pensions and payments. And where a member left prior to April 88, this will lead to a new widower's record needing to be set up, as previously before 1988 there was no widower's pensions payable within the LGPS. It's worth noting under the impact section that we'll need to revisit thousands of deferred and pensioner records to review survivors' entitlements, and this is just going to add to the administration burden as discussed in the next paper for McCLOUD. That's what I wanted to cover. Happy to take any questions around the exit cap or the widowers issue from the legal case.
Donna?
Yeah, thanks. I was just going to ask, you said in the paper that so the cap will probably be in by the end of December 2020. Do you think because of the current situation that might slip that timescale?
McCLOUD have been really proactive in the last 4 to 6 weeks and issuing consultations. The only issue that I may think it might slip is because we've just had this local government consultation and there's a lot to be changed within the LGPS regulations to get this in by January, and also compensation scheme. So I do think there will be a hard push to get it in for January, but there is a lot of, there'll need to be consultation on the regs as well now, the LGPS regulations. But I was actually quite shocked to see the extent of what they're proposing in the LGPS regulations, because we all just thought it was going to hit people who were around the 95k. But it's evidently going to hit everybody with the new proposals that they're bringing in. Everybody is going to suffer reductions between 30 to 70% of the redundancy packages. I didn't think that they would be saying, if you were taking a strain payment, you can't have a discretionary payment. Also, any statutory payment will come off any strain payment. So it is really far-reaching right across all membership categories.
Yeah, I just think given the the savings that council are going to have to be making, there's going to be quite a few people are going to lose their jobs, and I don't know, is it worth having some communication out to members just to alert them to the potential?
Yeah, we did alert people about the 95k came in, because that came in the government response, and the draft regulations came in July. but this recent consultation was only issued last Monday, so we will be alerting members. But the point that you just made, Donna, to say, you know, local authorities are going to be really pushed now with COVID and for the finances. Well, this may be one issue from the employer side, that they do want to get it in quicker, because it's obviously going to save them huge amounts of money in not having to pay strain costs, or if there is a strain cost, you don't pay any discretionary payments.
Yeah, but I'm not thinking about the councils, I'm thinking about
I
the
know,
members.
well, that's what I'm saying, yeah.
Understand that as well.
Yeah, but that obviously, you know, they've got to get the employer's consent, haven't they, to go on redundancy. They can't just think, well, I'm all running out now on redundancy because it's better for me. They've got to get the employer's consent to do that. But I will be alerting all my staff not to do any quotes beyond January, and all employers to say you need to think about stopping any quotes beyond January because of the huge implications these regulations have.
Can we have Stephan followed by Roger?
Thanks, Yvonne, for that. It was just to follow up on the last question, really. I know your interface with HR leads and the major employers, but I think as we go over the next few months, I think that relationship between your technical officers, your comms people, and the comms people and the technical office leads in the employers will be really, really important, so that the messages for what is an incredibly complex new area that's coming in quite quick. I think that joint working will be really important, so that the information that's put out is consistent, is easily understood, and, being blunt, is correct, because there'll be different levels of expertise in the system that'll help inform employers and employees on what the impact is. But I'd agree with you, from having read it over the last 10 days, it's far-reaching.
Exactly, it is. And also, you know, it'd be really useful. Obviously, the fund will respond to this consultation, but all employers should respond, because it has a massive impact on their severance policies. So I think, you know, everyone should join forces, the fund and employers alike, to respond to the consultation, which is 9th of November, the consultation end date for this.
Roger? Roger, do you want to come in?
You're on mute.
Roger, on mute.
Sorry. Thanks, John. It is hugely disappointing, but just a quick question. The standard strain cost, who's going to calculate that?
Pension fund. The pension fund calculates the strain cost, but we have got some employers with access to the Altair, so they can calculate that strain cost. But obviously, as I said, it's going to be dependent on the information flows coming from the employer, to say what their potential redundancy payment is, what the discretionary payment is, and what the strain cost is, for us then to go back to the member and give them all the options, what they've got.
A nightmare.
What patch they're going to take, because there's 3 different options that they can take. So it's obviously going to, as Stephan said, people need to have to understand it, and there's going to be a lot of engagement with the fund, with the members, to tell them what options there are available. But obviously we need to get that information from the employers around what the potential redundancy payment is, the statutory and also any discretionary, because it's obviously going to have a massive impact on the choices that member makes.
Yeah, it's another huge amount of work for the fund, then, isn't it?
Yes, massive, yeah. And obviously members might, members might think, well, I'll go for me redundancy payment, I'll go for the discretionary because that's money up front, and they're not actually understanding that the strain cost potentially is a lot more advantageous to the member, because it's over a longer period where you get your pension, and the strain element of the unreduced benefits is probably a lot more worthwhile financially to the member. But then they've got the tensions between getting the money up front, haven't they, for the redundancy payments and the discretionary payments. So just depends where they are, the member is financially, of what they need at the point of the retiring, really.
Yeah, but it's going to be a nightmare.
It is, but I do suspect a lot of the people will just want to get hold of the redundancy payment and the discretionary rather than the strain cost. A lot of our members.
Okay, thank you.
I mean, I think to summarise, this is a hugely complicated area. This consultation has been issued is not, as Yvonne has said, as expected. I certainly didn't expect to see discretionary redundancy payments, banned if people are on a strain. And the whole thing is surprising, but I think it is a matter where there will be a range of views, and I think it is important that employers respond in their own rights. The fund will, but of course remember that any individual can respond as well. So anyone who's a member of this board can respond as an individual, and if people wish to, they ought to. And correct me if I'm wrong. I think it's difficult for the board to take a position on this because it is complicated and there's a lot of different alternatives. But anyone who has a view on this ought to be writing in, because the one thing about government consultations is sometimes the weight of responses does change things. It isn't a waste of time responding. So if anyone feels as an individual strongly about this, that they should respond. Can we note this report? Yeah. Okay. To you again, Yvonne. McCLOUD remedy.
Okay, thanks, John. Right, we are to McCLOUD now. There's been recent movements in regard to the McCLOUD judgment, and as this case has been rumbling along for a couple of years, it's probably worth reminding you of all of the positive history of what's been going on. 2011, if you all remember, Denny Alexander, who was Chief Secretary to the Treasury, made a promise to members of public sector pension schemes that they would not suffer any financial detriment when the schemes changed from final salary to career average if they were within 10 years of retirement on the 1st of April 2012. As part of the reforms, there was an agreement between the employers, the unions and the government that the LGPS, as the only major funded scheme, would change basis from 2014, and the retirement age would be linked to SPAR. All active members transferred to the new scheme on the 1st of April, although the other unfunded schemes moved to their new schemes in 2015, and they also used the within 10 years of retirement age criteria to keep some members in the old scheme, and the younger members were all transferred to the new schemes. We moved as the LGPS a year earlier, primarily to avoid increases in member contributions. And in the LGPS, that 10-year promise is met by a protection called the underpin. And this is a calculation applied at retirement for any member who was age 55 or above on the 1st of April 2012. And what the calculation does, it compares the benefits payable under the current rules, which is a career average, with the benefits that would have been paid under the final salary scheme. And any addition is paid as an underpin amount. In 2018, the Court of Appeal found in favour of an age discrimination case brought up by Victoria McCLOUD, and she was a member of the Judges' Pension Scheme. And this was subsequently upheld by the Supreme Court in 2019. Thereafter, the government instructed all departments to revisit the protections in their pension scheme and take action to remedy any discrimination. Over the past couple of years, there have been employment tribunals, multiple reviews with actuaries and the Scheme Advisory Board and various working groups, and this has culminated in the MHCLG releasing the consultation on the 16th of July, setting out the proposed remedy on the LGPS. This consultation is open for 12 weeks and provides extensive detail on how the remedy will be applied. My take on that is that the principles won't change. It's just around the application, around the guidance. I don't think the principles, because it is so detailed, that they're making sure that they're not going to be subject to any discrimination cases in any areas. The summary of the proposals are listed in section 2.7 of the report, but the key feature of the remedy is that the final salary underpin is extended to a wider group of members for service up to March 2022. As with the 95 cap, there are a number of unexpected additions resulting in the need to revisit post-14 leavers and to carefully consider the operational and resource impacts. There's also a proposal to introduce a two-stage process to calculate a provisional underpin when members leave without excess and benefits, and to communicate the position to members. Now, that position may change multiple times prior to retirement, and this is only likely to cause confusion and uncertainty with the membership. It's really confusion, that element of the consultation. This remedy brings significant challenges for the fund in relation to governance, data, comms and training. We do expect some centrally produced materials, but it's going to take careful planning and resourcing to ensure the smooth implementation of the regs. I've done some analysis, and the number in scope members for our fund is over 34,000. Whilst the government doesn't actually expect the underpin to result in an increase in pension for many members, the admin activity to collect and verify the data, along with the application of the underpin for decades, and the number of retrospective calculations for pensioners, deferreds, deaths, transfers, along with the associated comms, is going to be a mammoth task for admin teams. And one of the things that the fund really needs to consider is whether we'll require additional staff or consider outsourcing some tasks. This is obviously going to be coloured by the guidance issues around expectations, the data already held, and the software suppliers' offerings around bulk calculation and uploads. Employers will need to supply us with data and respond to queries, which is also going to have resource impacts on employers. As you would expect, there's already a marketplace opening up with organisations offering their service, so it's an industry within an industry. It's also noteworthy that at the 29 valuation, employers were given the option to include an allowance for McCLOUD in their contribution rate. Some employers did choose to make provision, and we wouldn't expect to revisit their allowance until the next valuation. For the employers who didn't make provision, the FSS allows us to revisit the position once the remedy is finalised. Therefore, we just need to consider whether we're going to ask employers to adjust contributions at a future date, you know, and considering what's going on with COVID and financial pressures on employers. So basically, that's a brief summary of the issues, and with the fund is currently pulling together its thoughts for a formal response to the consultation, which closes on the 8th of October. In addition, as a remedy has now been published, the Treasury has announced that it will restart the cost cap assessment for all public sector schemes, and it's confirmed that the McCLOUD remedy is to be included in that assessment of the costs. Finally, the recommendation of the report asks the board for its support for the fund to develop a project plan to inform the costs and resource requirements in implementing the McCLOUD remedy. That's all I wanted to say on that, but I'm happy to take any questions on the issues faced by employers and the funds and members and communicating these changes.
Anyone got any questions or thoughts? Stephan?
Thanks, Yvonne, again. Really helpful. And again, I don't envy you on a day-to-day basis. Can I just ask you and Peter how you think this plays out over the next 12 months? And I know you haven't got a crystal ball, but we talk about there is the opportunity to review contribution rates for employers within this cycle. Bearing in mind the figures that you saw when you did some indicative work in 2019, how do you think this plays out for employers over the next 18 to 24 months?
I think the assumptions that we made were actually pretty accurate because we did take into account that we thought it would only be people who would be affected in scope members at 1st of April 2012. Where we did go a bit further was we included future service contribution rates for 22-23, which we know now isn't appropriate because, you know, the protection's only up to 2022. As I say, because of, we do think we got the assumptions right. What we've included, whatever the costs were, I think it was broadly around 0.6% for future service costs, 0.8% for past service costs. So we're pretty confident that the assumptions we put in were correct, but it's just around now the engagement that we're going to have with the employers around affordability now, and whether, you know, it's appropriate to include within this valuation, or if we leave it till next valuation. That's something that we need to consider. I mean, as you've obviously seen, Stephan, as we've just spoke before, MHCLG are banging out all regulations and consultations in the last few weeks, and you've probably seen the one around employer flexibilities around contribution rates and deferred debt arrangements. I haven't included it in the LGPS update because it came out after the time I had to write this report. So there will be considerations around looking at the opportunity or the option to relook at contribution rates, but it's based around changes in employer liabilities, around covenants, not really around impact of markets. But you know, there is that is the reason, to be honest, why the government have brought in them regulations in September. It was before the close of the furlough scheme, and it does recognise that local authorities are going to have financial detriments because of COVID-19, and given the opportunity for funds to work with all employers, including councils, around contributions going forward.
Okay, thank you.
Lyn?
Oh, hi Yvonne. Just reading through some of the papers in regards to the forthcoming changes, as well as the impact on the fund in terms of resource and being able to do what you need to do. How likely you'll be able to tell employers what the size of their part is to play in this? So, for example, of the 34,000 in scope, how many are like, you know, how soon would you be able to tell employers what the share of that is, if you like? Because they'd have to also do their own workforce planning, I should imagine, in terms of being able to respond effectively to you.
Are you talking about the McCLOUD?
Well, I'm talking about there's the McCLOUD, there's the survivor pensions issues as well. Throughout the reports, it talks a lot about having to speak with employers about what you're going to need from employers. So as an employer, what do we need to prepare for? What's the size of our job, really?
Okay, well, what we will be doing is, as I said, we've got centrally produced materials from SAB around templates to go back and access data for employers. So we will. That's something that I'll be looking at in the next few weeks. Whether we feel the information that we already hold, because the fund did actually continue to collect hours and service. Well, not so much service break, but the hours for members post 2014. So I've done some quick rough analysis, and it looks like we've got about 90% of data for changes of hours for employers for the McCLOUD. So it pretty much depends on the guidance that's going to come out to say if the funds, because that data that I've got is only at the 31st of March, it's not incorporating all changes right throughout the years. So it'll be pretty much dependent on that guidance to see if we can take a proportionate approach to collection of data, because as I said, the government don't expect that McCLOUD is actually going to impact on a lot of members. It's just around the application, the practicalities of collect the data, to have that data there. So if we do some analysis and think we've got 90% of that data, depends on what the guidance says. If we think that's appropriate in light of the analysis done by guards saying that it's likely to only to affect people between age 41 and 55, to how far we can come back and ask employers to provide that data for us. With regard to what that cost's going to be, we've looked at it and we think within our fund it's likely to cost about £90 million, which is 1% of liabilities. We'll have to do some more further analysis to say which employer, where they sit and how likely, how much it's going to impact on them within their liabilities. So we're going to have to do a lot more analysis. At the moment, we've just some high level analysis to say that we think there's about 34,000 members, when they're just basically the members who qualify. You were there at the 1st of April 2012 and had membership in the 2014 scheme. So a lot more analysis needed, and I understand what you're saying. Employees need to have to be briefed potentially what their impact is on their liabilities around the McCLOUD, and with the widowers' pensions as well. A lot of work needs to be done on that. We need to, because we potentially need to go back to 1972, because that's when deferred benefits came into force in 1972. So we need to go back and look at, you know, potential widowers cases for all members who's left since 1972. So massive task for the fund, and then for us to come back then and identify which employers have members in that category, and who have predeceased their, you know, the wives that predeceased them. Lots and lots of work to come back. But you might take a bit of comfort that the actuary's done some analysis around that, and they think on the accounting basis, it's probably only going to be around less than 0.1% of liabilities. So it's not going to be a massive financial impact, but massive impact for administration to try and find them members who are going to be impacted by the legal ruling around widowers' benefits. Does that help? Yeah.
Yes, it does. Yeah.
Anyone else got any thoughts or questions? No? Yvonne, can I ask you one brief question? I presume that the biggest difficulty could be for very small employers who have high paid staff. Is that broadly right?
Sorry, John, I didn't catch that. Can you say that again? I got up to high paid staff.
I mean, the whole of McCLOUD isn't really, you know, no disrespect, really going to hit the big employers hard, because there are so many other people within a big employer, within a council, to mitigate the effect of one person. But if you have, and I had one many years ago when I, you know, ran a county council fund in another context, but I know this could happen. A very small employer with a handful of members, but those members, or one of them, is very highly paid. And is it that sort of employer that could really see a big hit from this?
Yeah, exactly. That because McCLOUD is primarily focused on earnings growth. So if anyone has a pay growth above inflation, which is going to exceed, you know, the career average scheme is better in a way, because you get an accrual. The accrual is 22% greater than under the final salary scheme, under the 6-year scheme. But where it falls down is obviously where they're making the savings is the link to state pension age, whereas under the 2008 scheme the link's still to 65. So you're exactly right. If anybody has got pay increases above basically the 22% increase in accrual, and which negates the reductions in the state pension age, there is going to be an impact for any employers who have given, you know, huge high wage increases to certain some employers. Yeah,
So
some employees.
Is there a case actually for almost prioritising, if you know who they are, those sort of employers first, the ones, you know, with very few employees, but where there could be somebody with, you know, a big liability or a big pay increase? Because it strikes me they're the ones who will probably be, you know, least able to deal with this.
Yeah, well, that'll be assessed as part of the valuation, and we would be asking for, you know, appropriate contributions to cover that before they terminate their employment and we're left with a liability. But that'll be factored into the ongoing valuations, because we'll be able to see that, you know, the pay is increasing greater than CPI. So that'll be taking effect when we're looking at the costs for that employer at each valuation.
Thanks for that, Yvonne. There's I think, a very positive recommendation on page 20. Does somebody want to second and propose that recommendation? Can I have a member to propose that and a member to second it?
Yeah, I'll propose it.
Seconder?
I'll second it.
That's great, Donna. Thank you. Is everyone content with that recommendation, which I think is positive and makes it very clear the resourcing will be addressed in all of this, which I think is absolutely crucial.
Yeah, agreed.
Okay, thanks a lot. Thanks a lot. I'll go get along with doing my work streams and looking what we need to be doing in preparation for the regs coming out.
Thank
you.
you. Peter, investment performance.
Yes, thank you, Chair. It's a short paper. Our performance is included in our annual report and accounts, but this year they've been delayed just by reason of COVID and so on. So it sets out the performance of the fund against its strategic benchmark. I'm sorry that the table at the top of page 22 has got distorted by being copied into PDF, but effectively that shows the performance of the various regional markets that the fund is invested in. But very simply speaking, the fund had a very steady performance for the 12 months to the end of March. Just to remind you, the end of March was roughly the trough in markets. So markets had sold off very sharply from the 19th of February 2020 when the US peaked at that point. Obviously, the US has more than regained the level as at the 19th of February, but markets did sell off very sharply, and with the fund being fairly defensively positioned, we held up better than the average LGPS fund for the 12 months, and that does read through into our longer term performance as well. I think that's really all I wanted to say on that, John. There is a commentary on markets, but that mirrors pretty much the commentary that we have in our report and accounts once those are published.
Anyone any thoughts or observations?
Yeah, could I say something there, John?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, I think although these figures are negative, I think they are a lot better than could generally have been expected. And if you look at the way the various markets have performed, I think the investment team need to be commended on this.
Thanks, Pat. Anyone else any thoughts? The only thought I've got, Peter, is that I think this does sort of back up your attempts to sort of position the portfolio and the investment strategy to mirror your liabilities and what you actually need to achieve. And I think it is notable that, as you say, the average return, according to PERC, who I think monitor about 60 odd of the 85 funds that are now existing in England and Wales, and they record, I think, minus 4.8 as the average. Now, you know, these averages are all very questionable in terms of people setting very different strategies, but I think it does illustrate that the position for, you know, the average was a lot worse, and therefore the defensiveness of the portfolio, which you've stressed in the past, Peter, in these meetings, seems to have been borne out.
Yes, thank you. I think the only caveat, of course, is that the valuation of illiquid assets such as property, infrastructure, and private equity are always slightly problematic at a time of market stress. But nonetheless, we use some fairly conservative assumptions, and nonetheless, it isn't our assumptions. It is, professional valuers that are valuing our property portfolio and so on. And I guess that's not much different for other pension funds. And I think the fact that markets have, in general, recovered quite strongly, other than perhaps the real estate, the property market, is an indicative that those valuation assumptions that we used were fairly sensible.
Okay, thank you. Are we prepared to note the report?
Agreed.
Okay. RPI consultation, Peter.
Yes, this is a fairly dry paper. It contains our response to the RPI consultation. The paper sets out some background to the retail prices index, which has been the traditional measure of inflation, That moved to the Consumer Price Index from 2014 as the kind of official way of measuring inflation. Generally speaking, RPI runs about 1% ahead of CPI, and therefore the proposal to reform the calculation of RPI more in line with CPI means that the future expectation of inflation will be lower than otherwise expected. I think, for example, moving on to page 32, I show there that at the very top of page 32, it really runs on from the question of the impact on holders of index-linked gilts. Merseyside holds £39 million worth of the 1.25% index-linked 2055 issue. If RPI was to be reduced by 1% from 2030, this holding would be reduced by about 21%. So although a 1% reduction in inflation per annum doesn't seem a particularly large amount, with some of these longer dated holdings that we have, it does have an implication for us. And because our liabilities are already calculated by CPI, we don't get a commensurate change in the valuation of our liabilities, whereas a number of other pension schemes are still valuing their liabilities by RPI, as well as having index-linked gilts to match those, and therefore they would have a commensurate benefit in terms of reduction in their liabilities. So there's a fairly complete response there, I think, but I'm happy to take any questions, but clearly it's a concern to us. The government has the right, a statutory right to revise the calculation of RPI from any time from 2025 through to 2030 without compensation. But it isn't just the fact that we hold index-linked gilts, it's the fact that we have a number of infrastructure assets whose revenues are linked to RPI. We have a number of property holdings, again, where the rental is linked to RPI. If RPI is reduced going forward, then that has an implication for the valuation of those assets for the fund. We're owning those assets from a prudential point of view. We're holding them to match our liabilities. And if there's a reduction in the value of them, then clearly it reduces the funding of the scheme. So it is a concern to us.
Thank you, Peter. Has anyone got any observations or questions?
I've got a few, if that's okay, John.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, I was interested about the consideration of CPI to CPIH, and I note that it said that CPIH included the cost of living in and maintaining one's own home. I'm assuming from that there's no consideration of the cost, or rather the inflation in the cost of purchase, of purchasing houses, especially when we consider that over the last certainly 40 years. And the question that arises from that is, roughly, what is the difference or the ratio between CPI and CPIH?
From looking at the figures, the so-called wedge, the difference between RPI and CPI has been about 1%. The difference between RPI and CPIH seems to be about 0.8%. So very simplistically, it seems to be about 0.2%. But that's just a kind of back of the envelope expectation based on the figures that I can see here. I don't actually know the answer to that, Pat.
Okay, thanks for that, Peter. I think where I'm looking at this is from an ordinary man on the Clapham omnibus's perspective. And I think RPI has singularly failed to reflect the effects of house price inflation on the standard of living for most people in this country over the last 40 years. And that house price inflation, I think, is reflected through into the increase in house rental inflation. And I think the effect of adopting CPI as opposed to RPI has had a greater effect on the true and honest measurement of standard of living, or cost of living rather, that has badly affected people. And that's something that, whilst it might not be the responsibility of the public sector pension fund to comment on that, I think in terms of our members' perspectives, in terms of the integrity and the honesty of these measures and the reliability of them, I don't think they are in truth honest measurements of inflation as it hits the membership.
Yes, I suppose, to be fair, it's price inflation rather than, dare I say, asset price inflation. And you'll be more aware than me that over the last 10 years, with interest rates falling as sharply as they have, inflation seems to have come through in asset prices rather than in the price of goods, which is why inflation seems to be so stubbornly low. I suppose government would say that CPIH introduces a degree of housing cost, but yes, I can't comment further than that.
I appreciate that, Peter, and it's obviously it's not our fault as the wider pension fund or even the pension fund community, but I do think this does fail ordinary people, and it's not an honest measure of the overall picture. End of rant. Sorry.
Okay.
Yeah.
Geoff?
Yeah, thanks. Peter, I think it's just interesting because there's an awful lot of obviously legal contract leases and the like written with RPI sitting in there, and even investment returns sitting with RPI in there. And if RPI just disappears, then technically those legal contracts become very complex because the factor that's meant to be applied no longer exists. So I just wonder how these, and I'm not sure you will have an answer to this, but I just wonder how that's going to pan out, because at some point in future, somebody's going to come back and say, well, this particular lease is increased by RPI, and somebody's going to say, well, there isn't an RPI, so what do we do? So I suspect there's going to be some big legal arguments at the end of the day as to how we convert all those contracts and all those bonds and everything else into a format that's actually going to be workable. Because if RPI is lost, it just seems an awful lot of difficulties around.
Yes, they do. Whether as is perhaps indicative, it's simplest to look back and say, on average, RPI has differed from CPIH by whatever it is. Therefore, we'll use CPIH plus a margin going forward. That seems to be the expected solution to the issue. But you're quite right. There are a lot of international investors investing in the UK who won't necessarily be happy about the change.
And it's very difficult to apply something.
Yeah.
Sorry, it's very difficult to apply something to a legal contract that says RPI. You can't just suddenly say, well, we'll switch that to CPI or CPIH. The contract itself says RPI. So unless there's agreement between parties, you can't replace that. And that almost forces you into a really back into a corner where there doesn't seem to be an easy way out.
Yes, clearly since 2014, when perhaps investors became more aware that there could be a change, then generally legal contracts have been written with a fallback basis, so to speak. But you're quite right, longer term contracts do have a big question mark over how that will be resolved. I'm sure the lawyers are happy, even if no one else is.
Thank you, Peter. I think it's good the fund has responded. And you're absolutely right about this is a transfer of wealth really from pension fund and others to the government. We can only hope that I think you answered the question 6 about an independent process to address the implications of change, as Geoff has rightly pointed out, just is what's needed. So I'm glad the fund has responded, because I suspect there are many organisations affected by this who, for whatever reason, haven't responded, and these issues do need to be pointed out. Can we agree with the recommendation to note the report and response?
Yeah, agreed. Yeah.
Item 7, revised terms of reference.
Thanks, John. This is me. The report informs the pension board of the proposed revisions to its terms of reference, and it's just to allow for the virtual meetings. Section 2 of the terms have been expanded to include 2.4 and 2.5, which permits virtual meetings using video and telephone conferencing and define the terms of attendance. I've also included a new section 5 for virtual meetings, and this sets out the operation practicalities, etiquette, voting procedures and troubleshooting in the event of the failure of the remote facility. My recommendation is that the draft terms are attached as an appendix, and the changes are solely introducing an alternative way of meeting with no impact on functions, so they can be approved by the board and they don't need to go elsewhere for any ratification. Thank you.
Can I thank you for that, Yvonne? Has anyone got any questions or comments? I just got one proposal which I discussed with Peter this morning, which was that a virtual or hybrid meeting should only take place on the approval of the Director of Pensions, or in their absence, the Head of Pensions Admin in consultation with me. Just to be clear as to who's got the right to call a virtual or hybrid meeting, i.e. it's the Director of Pensions as far as I'm concerned, in consultation with the independent chair. And if anyone's got any thoughts or comments on that or anything else, but that would be my one addition, and my only addition. I think it's very good what you've done.
Thank you.
So yeah, could I just add to that, John? I agree with that. Just it's a useful insert, Yvonne. We don't ever have a secret ballot, do we? Of
No.
any? No.
No.
That's okay. That's fine. Just, we were discussing it in another organisation how you do that, and we've ended up with a situation where if you needed a secret ballot, you'd have a 10-minute adjournment, and the members would then email the person taking the notes, and they would then be able to count the votes that way. Which it's a difficult one to do, but we don't need them here, so that's okay.
No, this is you have a public vote. I don't think you ever had a vote actually. I can't remember if I had one. Lyn?
Yeah, just to add, John, that I would agree about the decision not to hold a hybrid meeting. I tried to do a training session the other day to staff with people in the room as well as on Teams, and it's not a good experience for either party, either the presenter or the participants. It just doesn't work. I don't think so.
Yeah, well, that was why that's why I wanted to insert, the Director of Pensions having the right to say yes or no to anything. So there's no lack of clarity as to who has the right to organise the meetings. As far as I'm concerned, the administrative authority, i.e. the Director of Pensions, has that right ultimately. And I think we ought to put that into the terms of reference. Because you're right, I think, Lyn. I think Yvonne used the correct word to say it would be extremely unusual. I can't think somewhere where it would happen, but we need it in there for something we haven't foreseen. But you're right, it should be carefully controlled. That's why I suggested this morning to please that we add in the Director of Pensions effectively determines whether there's a virtual hybrid meeting.
Thank you.
Is everyone content with
John,
what's been proposed?
Comment stroke question. 5.1. Given the nature of virtual meetings, they will be limited to 90 minutes in length. I wonder whether we could have something there that can be lengthened, given a 5-10 minute break, something along those lines.
Well, I've got no problem with that part, or limited to 90 minutes in length in principle, because things can go on beyond that. you know, I haven't got a hard feeling on it. I don't know if anybody else has.
I mean, I just make one comment. I'm not even sure why we even need to put that line in, if I'm being quite honest. I don't think, you know, does it really mean anything by 90 minutes? I mean, is 90 minutes significant or not? You know, I think it should be up to the chair to decide how long the meeting is going to last, quite frankly. But yeah, I'm happy either way.
I'd agree with Geoff on that, yeah.
So,
Okay, I'll take that out. I'll take 5.1 out.
so you'll take 5.1 out, Yvonne, and you'll put something in about the Director of Pensions having the authority to call either a virtual or hybrid meeting.
Okay, and
Consultation.
extenuate sense.
Yeah.
Okay, then that's fine.
Yeah. Okay, now that's great. Thanks for bringing that together, because I think that's been really helpful, particularly what's on page 40 of those guidelines. I think it just does clarify everything. And thanks for that, Yvonne. So are we content to approve the recommendation as slightly amended?
Yeah, agreed.
Thank you. The next one is the working party minutes, but there is an exempt report in 18, so I suggest we hold it over to report 18. Number 9 is the business plan, but that is exempt element in report 15, so can I suggest we hang over to report 15. Then there's a risk register, but there's an exempt paper 17 on that. So that would take us to item 11. At this point, I will propose that we go into private session. Therefore, I will read the declaration. When I've read the declaration, could I ask, you know, if members agree that a member identifies themselves and proposes that, and a member identifies themselves and seconds that, and if we then have agreement that the Wirral officers exclude the rest of this broadcast from the public domain. So if I could read the declaration, which I will in full. So exempt information, exclusion of members of the public. The recommendation is that under section 100, brackets A, brackets 4, of the Local Government Act 1972, the public be excluded from the meeting due consideration of the following items, that's items 12 to 18 of business, on the ground that they involve the likely disclosure of exempt information as defined by the relevant paragraphs of Part 1 of Schedule 12A as amended to the 1972 Act. The public interest test has been applied and favours exclusion. Can I have a proposal for that, please?
I'll propose it.
Yeah, I'll second that, Donna.
So we've got Donna and Geoff. Okay, is everyone content with that?
Yes. Yeah.
Can I ask the appropriate Wirral officer if effectively this broadcast is now being closed?